If you look up what's the longest book ever written, you're gonna find that it's Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. It consists of recollections of the main character's life from childhood to early adulthood in 19th century high society France. It was published in volumes over the years, so I guess there's something in there to distinguish it from a series and make it one actual book, but I digress. I'm here to talk about the other longest book ever written, one which no one's ever read in its entirety other than perhaps the author. This is Joe Gould and his An Oral History of Our Time. Joseph Ferdinand Gould was born on September 12, 1889 at high noon. Here's his birth chart in case you're curious. In Norwood, a town close to Boston, to one of the oldest families in the region. As a child, Gould wasn't much good at anything, his words not mine. His nose was always running, he was expected to become a doctor but fainted when seeing blood, was made fun of by the teachers, his father also didn't believe in him, his mom pitied him. Anyways, the girls who get it, and the girls who don't. He graduated from Harvard in 1911, you know how it is with old and powerful families, and then spent some years studying eugenics. Eventually, his money ran out and his father wanted to find a job for him in Norwood. But Joe wasn't stupid. I mean, he had a few loose screws, but he could see that the people who were kind to him in his hometown only were so out of pity. Everyone laughed at him behind his back. So he decided to set off to New York and engage in literary work, and there he felt like he had finally found his place. Joseph Mitchell described him like this: Gould looked like a bum and lived like a bum. As a rule, he wore a garment continuously until someone gave him a new one, whereupon he threw the old one away. He was a chronic sufferer from the highly contagious kind of conjunctivitis that is known as pink eye. His voice was distractingly nasal. On occasion, he stole. He was nonsensical and bumptious and inquisitive and gossipy and mocking and sarcastic. All through the years, nevertheless, a kind succession of men and women gave him old clothes and small sums of money, and bought him meals and drinks, and paid for his lodging, and invited him to parties and to weekends in the country, and helped him get such things as glasses and false teeth, or otherwise took an interest in him, some simply because they thought he was entertaining, some because they felt sorry for him, some because they regarded him sentimentally as a relic of the village of their youth, some because they enjoyed looking down on him, some for reasons that they themselves weren't at all sure of, and some because they believed that a book he has been working on for many years might possibly turn out to be a good book, even a great one, and wanted to encourage him to continue working in it. This book was the aforementioned An Oral History of Our Time, which Gould said consisted of bits, chunks, and pieces of dialogue he has heard throughout the years, verbatim or summarized. Well, back to 1910s New York City. He got a job and everything was sorta going. One day in a bookstore, he picked up a book by William Carleton with an introduction by William Butler Yeats, an introduction that would change his life forever. The history of a nation is not in parliaments and battlefields, but in what the people say to each other on fair days and high days, and in how they farm, and quarrel, and go on pilgrimage. And in that moment of 1917, that was when he decided to also quit his job because a work such as the oral history would be way too demanding to be only a part-time thing. Since that fateful morning, he continued, squaring his shoulders and dilating his nostrils and lifting his chin, as if in heroic defiance. The oral history has been my rope and scaffold, my bed and my board, my wife and my floozy, my wound and the salt on it, my whiskey and my aspirin, and my rock and my salvation. It is the only thing that matters a damn to me. All else is dross. By the way, completely unrelated to everything else, he knew the language of seagulls. Like he could translate and stuff. Pretty cool. Since Gould was homeless, anytime he would fill one of his composition books, he'd leave it with the first trusted person that he'd met on that particular day. Then, every few months, he would collect them and say that he was sending them over to an old friend's house. He also claimed that his book was about a dozen times as long as the Bible. Joseph Mitchell was a journalist, and him and Gould met because he wrote articles about NYC personalities and decided to write about the infamous writer. And from that point onwards, the journalist became one of the people Joe Gould trusted, whether he wanted to be that or not. He didn't. After a first meeting and some talk about his upbringing, Joe Gould lent a few chapters of the oral history to Joseph Mitchell, but they're just rambles about the death of the Gould father and other blah 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 blah, who cares? With distinctively no, conversations, verbatim or otherwise, the oral history of our time. He tried to press the author for more chapters, but all he got were more versions of the dead funeral chapter, one about his eugenics research, and more stuff that, guess what, didn't contain what the book was advertised as. In their next meeting, Joe pulls the, well, there are conversation chapters and essay chapters, blah 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 blah. Yeah, right. He also says that he's sending all his composition books to a friend who lives in a farm, and it's kind of far away to go visit, and the friend doesn't want to send them via mail. And getting to the point, it seems like any other oral history chapters are unreachable, and the journalist pulls the might as well drop the story. And obviously Gould goes, oh no, please. He then proceeded to recite dozens of conversation chapters from memory. So, I guess joke's on us for doubting him. And then Joe just continued talking and talking and showed up to Joseph's office and talked more. That is understandable that someone so shunned by everyone around him would jump at the opportunity of someone being so interested in him. And it's also understandable that Mitchell was going a little bit insane at that. Like, dude, I'm no therapist, I'm no doctor, I'm just a guy. Well, the profile on Joe Gould kinda went viral. They started getting a lot of letters and stuff, but Gould was still living the same way. Of course, more people were giving him food and helping him out, but he didn't all of a sudden get a stable income or anything. Well, and Gould just kept coming in to collect his mail and obviously talk. And be a creep also because I couldn't really fit in this story, but Joe Gould was a creep to women, so keep that in mind. And Joseph fell for the, well, you wanted to write about me. You sought this out. Now deal with it. Kids, don't be like this, please. Instead of simply telling Gould to get the hell out of his office, the journalist decided that the best course of action would be to get him an editor or publisher. But it's never that simple with this little man. He had fought with one, didn't like the other, the third one wore a gray tie instead of a purple one, and so the editors would either refuse to take Joe or he would burn the bridges himself. Joseph Mitchell was obviously exasperated by this. He had dealt with enough of Gould's blabbering. By the way, this is happening in 1942. I think that summarizing the story doesn't really show its scope, but I'm also not gonna sit here and read you the whole book. So think about that. Joe Gould got to New York City and started working on his masterpiece in 1917. For 25 years, he has been living off of donations and writing non-stop, but doesn't have an editor, and all he has to show is the chapter about his father's death, version 835. And no, it's not pride and not wanting to accept help, as you'll see in the following minutes. Why in hell did you do that and go to all that trouble if you've always been resolved in the back of your mind to publish it posthumously? I'm beginning to believe that the oral history doesn't exist. This remark came from my unconscious, and I was barely aware of the meaning of what I was saying. I was simply getting rid of my anger, but the next moment, glancing at Gould's face, I knew as well as I knew anything that I had blundered upon the truth of all the oral history. "My God," I said, "it doesn't exist." I stared at Gould, and Gould stared at me. His face was expressionless. "It exists in your mind, I guess," I said, recovering a little from my surprise. "But you've always been too lazy to write it down." Gould turned and faced me and said something, but his voice was low and indistinct. If I heard him right, and I have often wondered if I did hear him right, he said, "It's not a question of laziness." After that, a chasm appeared between the two. They kept in touch, mostly because Mitchell was still the one receiving Gould's mail, but now the journalist had a newfound respect for Gould, because he too had spent hours and hours writing a book in his head, and guess what? Never put a single word down on paper. We've all been there, but I feel like this is a little different. But anyway, things take a turn for the better for a while. Remember, the fact that the oral history doesn't exist isn't common knowledge, so things are still the same in the public eye. So some old rich woman decided to pay for a room and food for Gould so he could focus entirely on his writing. Good for him, but on the condition that he wouldn't try to find out who she was. He tries, but the people around him stop him before he ruins everything for himself. Everything was fine for 3.5 years, but then all of a sudden the rich woman turned on him and decided to stop supporting him. Oof. He tried to keep living in his room, but couldn't keep up with weekly rent and started numerous fires by falling asleep while smoking. So after a few months, he just had to go. It was all downhill from there. It didn't seem like he belonged to the old bohemian places. He had become a somber creature. The writer downgraded to drinking exclusively beer, so he was pretty much always drunk and always shoving his foot in his mouth, estranging old friends and people who he had pretended to like. It was now 1952. Joseph Mitchell realized that he hadn't seen Joe Gould for several weeks, but it wasn't uncommon for the guy to disappear sometimes, so he really didn't think much about it. But then, at a party in January 1953, a doctor acquaintance told him that the writer had been admitted to the hospital she worked at after collapsing and suffering from confusion and disorientation. Basically, he was senile and getting a bunch of minor afflictions on top of that. Pink eye, boils, chills, earaches, etc. But the worst symptom? Apathy. When he died in August 18, 1957, Joseph Mitchell inquired about any papers that he might have left. "No," he said, "not a scratch." A committee was created to try and track down the oral history, and Joseph Mitchell diligently played his part, even though he knew that it would never be found. Okay, that's it. Interesting little story, right? Back it up, guys. No, wait. Stop. No! Joe Gould's teeth asks the question, was Joseph Mitchell right? Did he do his due diligence and actually research Joe Gould in depth? And I'm gonna make this short. This book is weird as hell. It feels incomplete. Listen, I'm not gonna go through every single one of this book's sources to try and check if the author was bending the facts or not. But what I will say is that it's built up as an investigation, a quest to find the oral history and the real Joe Gould. But all we get are more details about what we already know. He was a little unstable. He wrote a lot. He probably would have been diagnosed with X, Y, and Z nowadays. He was a repugnant guy with pretty much no qualities. I know I skimmed over the sordid details, but trust me, man. And in the end, when the author manages to contact someone who claims that they have a trunk full of Gould's composition books, she just drops the investigation. Okay, Joseph Mitchell didn't check the dates and Gould's eugenics research and his infatuation with Augusta Savage, but who cares? It's like writing a history book about a folklore creature. It just exudes the, well, actually energy, you know what I mean? And it's just made worse because when the big payoff is within sight, you decide that you shouldn't pursue this further? Do you expect us to continue the investigation? Dude, I'm already reading a book about a guy who was a New York personality during the first half of the last century. I'm not gonna do any more research on Joe Gould. So yeah, keep in mind that maybe the oral history of our time exists somewhere. Maybe it's in your attic. Go check just in case. If you're inspired by the legend, then by all means let me know if your investigations dig anything up. All the information here was lifted from Joe Gould's Secret, which is an amazing read, and Joe Gould's Teeth, which, you know. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, blah 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 blah, and I'll make more videos if a navel doesn't fall on my head. Bye!